You were taught to be strong by holding your ground, by resisting, by refusing to bend. But what if that belief is the very reason you keep breaking? Water never argues with the shape of the land. It never announces its strength, yet nothing reshapes stone more completely. If discipline were not about force, but about adaptation, would your failures still look the same? Why do rigid people burn out while flexible ones endure? Why does effort exhaust you while others move quietly forward? Miyamoto Musashi did not teach warriors to be harder. He taught them to become formless. And if you've been fighting life head-on, what would happen if you flowed instead? His name is Daniel. He is 38 years old, married, one daughter, 7 years old. Every morning, Daniel wakes before the rest of the apartment stirs. Not because he chooses to, but because sleep loosens its grip early now. He lies still for a moment, listening to the pipes hum behind the walls, the low sound of water moving somewhere he cannot see. By 6:30, he is already dressed for work. Nothing remarkable. Office shoes, a neutral jacket, the kind of clothes that disappear into crowds. He works as a mid-level project coordinator for a logistics company. Deadlines, emails, meetings that stretch longer than they should. His life functions. That is the word he would use. In the evenings, he returns home at roughly the same time each day. His daughter often greets him at the door, holding something she made. Paper folded into shapes that barely hold. He kneels, listens, nods. Sometimes his phone remains in his hand longer than it should. At dinner, he eats quietly. His wife speaks about her day. Daniel looks at the glass of water beside his plate, untouched until the meal is nearly over. When he finally drinks, it is slow, measured, as if the movement requires permission. Nothing is collapsing yet, but something has thinned. There are moments, small, almost invisible, when Daniel pauses before acting, when tasks wait a little longer than they used to, when decisions soften, lose their edge, like a blade left resting too long in damp air. He is not defeated. He is not lost. But the shape he once held no longer fits the pressure around him. And somewhere beneath the routine, something begins to press, quietly, asking whether rigidity has mistaken itself for strength. The first crack does not announce itself. It arrives on an ordinary afternoon, inside a conference room that smells faintly of burnt coffee and recycled air. Daniel is seated halfway down the table, laptop open, hands folded when they are not typing. A project he has overseen for months is on the screen. Numbers, timelines, dependencies that now look thinner than he remembers. The delay is small, 2 days. Nothing catastrophic. But when his manager asks why the approval stalled, Daniel answers a second too late. Not because he lacks words, but because he waits for certainty that does not come. Someone else fills the silence. The meeting moves on. His explanation arrives when it is no longer needed. No one raises their voice. No one criticizes him directly. And that is what makes it heavier. That evening, Daniel arrives home later than usual. His daughter is already in her pajamas, seated at the kitchen table with a worksheet spread in front of her. She looks up when he enters. "Can you help me?" Daniel sets his bag down. He stands there longer than necessary, eyes scanning the paper. The problem is simple. He knows this. But his phone vibrates, an email notification. He glances at it once, then again. When he finally looks back at the table, his daughter has lowered her head. The pencil rests untouched. She does not ask a second time. Dinner passes quietly. Afterward, Daniel stands alone in the kitchen. The sink is full. He turns on the tap and watches the water strike the metal basin, splitting, scattering, finding paths around resistance. He does not move, not forward, not away. Just standing there, hands resting on the edge, long after the dishes could have been washed. No one forced him to delay. No one stopped him from acting. Something small has been missed, and it will not return in the same shape. Later that night, lying awake, Daniel realizes what unsettles him most. It is not failure. It is softness where precision used to be, like a blade that no longer cuts cleanly, like water trapped in a rigid vessel, pressing against its limits. The shift does not come from a lecture, or a warning, or a dramatic collapse. It arrives late, on a night Daniel does not plan to stay awake. He is sorting through an old storage box, looking for a missing cable, when his hand closes around a book he does not remember keeping. The cover is worn, no bright colors, no promise printed on the front, just a title he has heard before, but never touched. He opens it without sitting down. The pages do not explain how to win. They do not describe motivation. They speak instead of posture, distance, timing of adjusting without hesitation, of never fixing yourself into one shape. One line stops him. Not because it sounds profound, but because it feels uncomfortably accurate. Water does not resist the sword. It moves where the blade is not. Daniel closes the book, then opens it again. He reads slowly this time, not searching for instruction, but for something else, permission perhaps, or release. For years, he has tried to hold his ground, to meet pressure head-on, to remain firm in a world that keeps changing its shape. Each delay, each hesitation, has felt like weakness. But here, weakness is not the enemy. Rigidity is. That night, Daniel does not promise himself transformation. He does not plan a new routine. He does not draw a line in the future and swear to cross it. He only notices something. Water survives by adapting. Blades break by refusing to bend. The next morning, the alarm sounds at 4. Daniel reaches for it and stops. Not because he is tired, but because he is paying attention. He lets the moment pass through him, like a current deciding its direction. Then he sits up, not with force, not with resolve, just with movement that does not resist itself. For the first time in months, he does not try to be strong. He chooses to be fluid. The alarm does not feel different at 4 in the morning. The sound is the same. The darkness is the same. What has changed is Daniel's response. His hand reaches out, pauses, then rests on the edge of the bed. He sits there without bargaining, without counting how many hours remain. The floor is cold when his feet touch it. He stands slowly, as if testing whether the morning will resist him. In the bathroom, he fills a glass with water. It trembles slightly as he lifts it. He drinks without rushing. The water moves easily. It does not ask whether the body is ready. Outside, the street is empty. Daniel walks. Not fast, not slow. Each step placed, not forced. The air presses against his jacket. He lets it. In his mind, an image forms not sharply, but enough. A blade held too tight loses its edge. A blade guided lightly finds its path. This first morning offers no reward, no surge, no certainty, only friction, the quiet resistance between habit and movement. Daniel does not conquer it. He does not argue with it. Like water meeting stone, he adjusts his angle and continues forward, leaving no mark yet changing everything beneath the surface. The mornings begin to resemble one another. 4 o'clock, darkness, the same stretch of quiet before the world wakes. Daniel does not track progress. He does not measure improvement. He only notices what repeats, the sound of water filling the glass, the weight of the jacket settling onto his shoulders, the door closing with the same soft click each time. Some days, his steps feel precise. Other days, they scatter. He allows both. The routine does not bend to mood, and he does not demand comfort from it. At work, the changes are subtle. Emails are answered without delay. Not faster, just on time. When questions arise, he responds before silence stretches too long. His words are fewer now, but they land where they should, like a blade guided by alignment rather than force. At home, repetition appears in smaller gestures. He sits at the table when his daughter spreads her papers. He remains seated until the pencil moves again. No praise, no correction, just presence, steady and unannounced. Some evenings, doubt arrives quietly. It asks whether this sameness leads anywhere, whether adaptation is merely avoidance in another form. Daniel does not answer. He washes his hands and watches the water slip between his fingers, never holding shape, never resisting the space it enters. Un rigide stance demande constante correction. Water corrects itself. Days pass, then weeks. Nothing dramatic shifts, but the sharp edges of indecision soften, not into weakness but into flow. Choices require less preparation. Movement replaces hesitation. The blade, no longer clenched, begins to hold its edge. Daniel does not feel stronger. He feels less obstructed. The weather turns without warning. Rain begins before dawn, thin at first, then heavier, tapping against the windows with uneven rhythm. Daniel stands in the doorway, jacket in hand, listening. The street outside glistens under the lamps, water collecting along the curb, flowing toward drains already full. He steps out anyway. The rain soaks through his shoes within minutes. His breath shortens as the cold settles into his legs. Each step demands more attention now. Not because the ground is hostile, but because it refuses to stay predictable. Halfway through his route, the wind rises. It presses against his chest, shifting his balance. Daniel slows. He does not stop. He adjusts his angle, turning slightly, letting the force pass instead of meeting it directly. The training does not harden him. It exposes him. At work later that day, a sudden request lands on his desk. A timeline moved forward, a margin erased. Others argue, voices overlap. Daniel listens. When the moment opens, he speaks once. The decision moves, not because it is perfect, but because it moves. That evening, his daughter spills a glass at dinner. Water spreads across the table, reaching for the edge. Daniel's hand moves before thought. A towel appears. The moment passes without tension. No apology is demanded. No lesson is delivered. Later, alone, he stands under the shower. Water strikes his shoulders, relentless, unshaped, unopposed. He remains still, not bracing, not resisting. Storms do not test rigidity. They expose it. The blade that survives is not the hardest. It is the one guided with precision, loosened just enough to follow the hand. When Daniel steps out, the room is quiet again, and something within him no longer seeks shelter from resistance. It moves through it. The offer does not arrive loudly. It slips in during an ordinary week, disguised as relief. A colleague suggests a shortcut, nothing illegal, nothing obvious, just a way to move faster, to skip a few steps that no one seems to notice anyway. Daniel listens without reacting. He nods once. The words settle. That evening, fatigue lingers longer than usual. The old patterns wait nearby. Sleep later, scroll longer, let the morning decide for him. He sits at the kitchen table after dinner, hands resting flat on the surface. A glass of water stands in front of him, untouched. He watches the surface settle, small ripples fading until it reflects the ceiling light without distortion. Temptation does not demand betrayal. It invites adjustment. A rigid person snaps under this kind of pressure. A careless one dissolves. Daniel does neither. The next morning, the alarm sounds. His hand moves immediately this time, not quickly but without delay. Outside, the air is mild. The street offers no resistance. It would be easy to drift, to loosen the edges too far. He does not. At work, he chooses the longer path, the slower approval, the conversation that needs to happen rather than the message that could be avoided. It costs him time. It costs him comfort. But something remains intact. Water adapts, but it does not abandon its direction. A blade yields, but it does not lose its line. That night, Daniel returns home at his usual hour. His daughter is waiting with a new drawing. He sits. He stays. The moment holds. Discipline reveals itself here not in struggle, but in what remains unbroken when ease presents itself as an alternative. There is no moment when Daniel realizes it has changed. No signal, no line crossed. One morning simply feels clear. The alarm sounds, and his body moves before thought forms. Water fills the glass. He drinks. Outside, the street receives his steps without comment. Nothing resists. Nothing needs to be forced. At work, problems arrive and dissolve in sequence, not because they are smaller, but because he no longer meets them head-on. He adjusts distance, timing, pressure, like guiding a blade along its natural arc, instead of driving it forward. At home, his presence settles into the space quietly. His daughter speaks without checking whether he is listening. His wife pauses less often when she talks. The room holds together. Discipline no longer feels like effort. It feels like alignment. Water does not announce its strength, yet it shapes everything it touches. The blade, once clenched, now rests lightly in the hand, precise, balanced, ready, not rigid, not loose. Daniel has not become exceptional. He has become consistent. And in that consistency, something rare has emerged. A life that moves without friction against itself. The test does not come wrapped in drama. It arrives as an email marked urgent, sent late in the afternoon, when attention is already thin. A shipment has stalled. Contracts hinge on timing. If Daniel signs off on an adjustment now, the issue disappears for today. If he refuses, the delay becomes visible. Questions will follow. So will pressure. He reads the message once. Then again, the shortcut is clean, approved by precedent, used before. No one would call it wrong. It would save hours, possibly days. It would smooth the surface and move everything forward. Daniel does not respond. He stands from his desk and walks to the window. Below, rain gathers along the pavement, tracing lines around cracks, pooling where it must, flowing where it can. Water never chooses the fastest path. It chooses the possible one. His phone vibrates. A second message, then a third. Back at the table, voices rise. Opinions form quickly. Someone says, "We can't afford to wait." Another adds, "This is how it's always done." Daniel remains still. Not frozen, not conflicted, just present. He knows the cost of both choices. He also knows something else now, the shape of pressure, the way it pushes hardest against rigid edges. He does not harden. He does not dissolve. He measures distance, timing, consequence. The blade rests in his hand, imagined but steady, not lifted, not swung. He types a response. It is brief. It refuses the shortcut. It outlines the longer path. It accepts the delay. Silence follows. For several minutes, nothing moves. No reply, no reassurance. Daniel stays seated, hands resting flat, breathing even. This is the moment that once would have pulled him backward or driven him to force resolution. Now, he waits. Eventually, resistance breaks, not explosively, but gradually. A manager responds. Then another. Adjustments are made. Calls are scheduled. The problem does not vanish, but it moves. That evening, Daniel returns home later than usual. His daughter is already asleep. He stands at her doorway for a moment, watching her breathe. There is no regret in the delay, only awareness of what it cost and why it was chosen. In the kitchen, he pours a glass of water and drinks slowly. The surface settles. The final trial is never about strength. It is about stillness, under pressure. And tonight, Daniel does not mistake motion for progress or resistance for discipline. He lets the moment pass through him and remains intact on the other side. The change does not announce itself. There is no moment where Daniel looks in the mirror and recognizes a different man. What changes instead is how the world meets him and how little friction remains when it does. Mornings continue at 4, not out of obligation, but because the body has learned its rhythm. Water fills the glass. The street receives his steps. These actions no longer feel chosen. They occur. At work, Daniel is no longer described as hesitant. Not because he rushes, but because he moves when movement is required. Meetings shorten, questions land cleaner. When pressure rises, it does not cling to him. It flows around his responses, redirected by timing rather than force. His manager notices without remarking. Trust settles quietly, like sediment in still water. At home, the difference is felt rather than discussed. His daughter no longer watches him to see if he will stay. She assumes it. His wife speaks without bracing for absence. The spaces between words feel less fragile. The blade has changed hands. Once, Daniel gripped it tightly, believing control came from pressure. Now, it rests with balance guided, not clenched. The edge remains sharp, but it no longer trembles. Water, too, has changed not in nature, but in relationship. Where it once pressed against rigid walls, it now moves freely, shaping and shaped in return. The old version of Daniel has not been erased. It has been absorbed. There are still long days, still uncertainty, still moments where outcomes are unclear. But when those moments arrive, they do not fracture him. He adjusts, he continues. This is what discipline becomes when it is no longer an act. Not resistance, not endurance, but a life that flows without betraying its direction. Water survives because it never argues with reality. The blade endures because it is guided, not forced. Musashi did not ask warriors to be relentless. He asked them to be adaptable. Where have you been resisting what could be navigated? Where have you mistaken pressure for discipline? The shape of your life is not fixed. It responds to how you move through it. Tomorrow morning, when the moment arrives, will you meet it with rigidity, or will you flow without losing your direction? If this story stayed with you longer than expected, stay with the channel, share it, and step forward quietly.